Okay, hello. So it's time for the vocoder. The vocoder, as usual, I'll just go through and show you all the controls and what they do, and I'll show you a few different ways to use it. So I have a few things lined up here. Some of them are cool and some of them are more obvious. First of all, we'll have a look at what is a vocoder. So a vocoder basically takes a signal which is a modulator, which is usually a voice or something like that, but it can be whatever you want, and it reads the frequencies of the voice at certain bands which the vocoder sets, and then it adjusts the volume of a carrier, which is usually a synthesizer or something like that, just a solid wave or something, and it adjusts the bands to match them, so it sounds like the synth is talking, which is cool. But you can use it for other stuff. So before we launch into some of the other stuff you can use it for, we will have a look at the controls. So I've got just a vocal sample here from Splice. And I've got in the carrier here, I've just got a sawtooth wave with a bit of white noise. Actually, it's pink noise. And I'm just mixing that in. But first of all, we'll go to all the controls. So I'm just going to hit F1 here and bring it up. So we'll start on this side and move over. The modulator section is where the voice comes in, usually the voice or whatever is modulating. If you leave this blank, whatever the input signal is, so you can open this up and you can put an audio receiver and take stuff from another track. But if you leave it completely blank, then it will just use whatever the audio that's going into this device is. So you can preview that by, if I just hit play here. That's what we're using as the modulator. If you hit this little speaker button, it lets you hear it without it being put through the carrier. So this is just the volume for that. So then you've got the Formant. So what the Formant is doing is basically, as I said, it's analyzing the bands and then it's imparting that onto the synth sound. So what the Formant does is it takes those bands and moves them up or down the frequency spectrum. So if you hear, if I move down, and then if I move it up, it gets brighter. Then you've got like a brightness control here at the bottom. So that basically just is a shelf on the high and low frequencies. So if you've got like a lot of S's or something going on, you might want to pull this down, and that'll make it more legible. Generally, you might want to boost it a bit if say the synth sound that you're using maybe isn't as high frequency. It'll bring stuff like S's and T's through a bit better. Then we have the gate. So these two purple lines here are just a gate. So as it comes in, you can set a minimum here. So basically only bands that cross this threshold will be allowed in. You might want to use that if you've got like background noise or something like that happening in the vocal sample that you're trying to use. There's also a high one. That'll cut out things that are too loud. So if you've got too much S's or something going on, that'll cut it out and make it better. Then you've got these two, which are basically the highest and lowest bands where they start. So functionally, it's like a high pass filter, but what it's actually doing is moving the bands and basically putting them all in this area. So there's also a low pass here. So now all of your bands are happening within the frequency range of 544 hertz to 3.64 kilohertz. Generally, you just want to pull that down to wherever your vocal samples frequencies begin. So if there's any like low end rumble or anything like that, it's not going to interfere with the vocoder. Then you have two selections here. You've got mono and stereo, and that affects the carrier. So it will allow the carrier to be a stereo signal, or it will force it to be mono. Then you've got the number of bands. That's how many bands this modulator gets cut up into that then affect the synthesizer. So you can see there at 8, it's not particularly legible because it hasn't got enough detail. And as you bring it up, you get more and more detail. So you would think that using higher bands is always going to be more legible. That's not always the case. It depends on the source. So sometimes you might find that like 40 bands or 56 bands sounds better than 80 bands. You kind of just have to play around with it. I think it sounds best around 64 bands for this. Okay, so then you've got the band width. So what this is doing is it's setting the general steepness of the bands that it's cut up into. So these are wider bands and these are narrower bands. So this one here will sound more resonant. And the less narrow one tends to sound a bit more natural. But then if you play with that along with the overall bandwidth of all the bands here, you'll kind of find the best sound. So generally as you go down, so say if we go here at 10% on the narrower band setting, it's going to be really resonant because it's like a bunch of really steep bandpass filters that are just creating loads of like resonant sine waves. And then as you bring it up, it'll get less resonant. But then there comes a point where it's so not resonant that it doesn't really differentiate between the frequencies. So you kind of have to pick what sounds best for your signal. Then you have this freeze function, which will freeze the modulator levels wherever you hit that button. So that will stay imparted onto the carrier. So the best way is to just show you that. So we're just taking, turn that off. So we're just taking different parts of that vocal sample then and freezing it in time, and then whatever the frequency layout is at that moment, that's what we're using, basically. Then you've got attack and release here. This is basically setting how quickly the bands respond to the input. So it's if you have a high attack, it's going to be kind of like it is on a synth, where it's going to take a little longer for it to change the levels. And then if you've got a lower attack, it's going to be really snappy. And then release is how long those take to release. So if it's got a really low release, it's going to be da 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 da, and if it's got a high release, it's going to be like da 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 da, basically. That's the best explanation ever. So that goes all the way up to 10 seconds. Generally, if you've got a really high release time, it's going to affect how legible it is because certain frequencies are going to be passing over each other. So that's all the controls here in the middle window. Then you've got just the carrier stuff. So in the carrier here, you can put whatever instrument, synthesizer or whatever you want to be modulated by the modulator or the voice. And you can also leave it blank, in which case the modulator will modulate itself. And I will now show you that, actually. So let me just finish the controls here, actually. So you can control the volume here. So that's the volume in the carrier. You've got wet effects, which have nothing really to do with the carrier. They're just wet effects of the overall effect. And then you've got a mix. And that's everything. So let me just show you an example of everything turned off here. So if I just close all these effects that I have down here. So these are all in the carrier chain. So in either one of these chains, I can insert whatever I want. So say I wanted the vocal itself, the modulator, to have a pitch shift on it. So I could put a pitch shifter in here. And change the grain and all that. So now if I listen to the modulator, so now I can use that signal to modulate the carrier. So let's turn that on again. So the exact same is true here in the carrier signal, where if I have got, let me just turn everything off here. So if I've got everything off, first of all,
never say goodbye.
The voice is just going to modulate itself.
Never say goodbye. Never say goodbye.
Now we can still mess with these settings.
Never say goodbye. Never say goodbye. Never say.
But it's really just going to change the basic sound itself. Then once I turn on the polygrid here, which has the saw wave that I'm using. Let's pull down some of these because I kind of messed it up. So now I've got this. I've got just a saw wave, but I can also add effects onto that. So I can add an EQ, a saturator, chorus, reverb. So you can add as much stuff you want in there. And you can also add other instruments, like, you know, if you've got a VST that you really like or something like that, you can add it in there and send notes to it, and you can use it as such. That is all of the controls pretty much. So let's move on to some of the more interesting ways to use it. So I have another vocal sample here. Actually, it's the exact same vocal sample, I'm just using it differently. So what I'm doing here is I've got the modulator empty, so it's just using this vocal that I'm putting through it. I've got the carrier here, and the carrier has an audio receiver in it, and it's receiving audio from this instrument layer right here, okay? So what's in the instrument layer? Let's solo the instrument layer, because I've got it turned down, turn it up. So this is Pigments by Archeria. It's just a VST. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm just telling you what it is. And I've got two things running here. So I've got... Oh, let me just turn it up there again. So I've got this arpeggio, which is just running through Pigments' own arpeggiator. And I've got that layered with just these chords. So that's the sound. And then when I play it through here, when it's coming through this audio receiver into the carrier, and obviously if I solo one of these, then it's just going to be one of the sounds. So yeah, that's just an example of how you can pull something in from another track. So on to some more interesting uses of the vocoder. So I've got this pad sound here. Just let me play it for you. Oh. Let me turn that off. I kind of spoiled the surprise there of what I was going to do, but that's okay. So I've got this pad sound here. So it's just a basic kind of a pad sound with an extremely long reverb. Let's calm that down a bit. I got a bit overzealous when I was making it. It's at 10 seconds. Jesus, there's no need for that. I was obviously feeling a bit spacey when I was making it. Okay, that's fine. So, it's just a basic pad sound. So, I've got this vocoder on here. Give that a bit of volume. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the modulator here. So I'm taking it from another track. I'm taking it from that first track there, the vocal I was using for the first track, and I'm bringing it into the modulator section here instead. And I am freezing it at a certain frame. So 1 second now. So you can freeze it at different parts, and it will impart another vocal quality onto it. So each place you freeze it is going to have a slightly different vocal kind of a sound. Let's have a look at another use of that. So I've got the same kind of thing happening here, but I've got the vocoder set up so that it's freezing and unfreezing the vocal at different parts here using this steps mod. So basically this is freeze off, and then this is freeze on, this is freeze off, this is freeze on. And then I've got this random modulator here attached to the Formant, so we're getting a different Formant every time as well. So let's play that. So this is doing the same thing. It's taking that vocal, that first vocal, and it's playing through it, and it's taking different sections and it's freezing it to impart whatever the filter shape is at that point. So that's pretty cool. And then I've got, I think, one more here. So yeah, this time instead of using a vocal, I'm going to use drums. So I've got a drum coming in here through the audio source into the modulator. And that's going to be modulating my signal here. So let's turn the freeze off. So it's coming from this drum loop here. Let's turn that up for a second. Right. And now we can freeze at different points in this as well. And it's going to give us a different timbre every time. So that's that. It's pretty useful for pads and stuff like that. Anyway, loads of cool stuff you can do there. I've got a couple of examples of using the vocoder as a self-modulator. So this is using it just to modulate the signal you're putting through it. So the first one is this. I'll show you here. So let's turn off, it's actually inside of a bit 8 here, so let's turn that off. So this is what we've got. Just a sine wave. Then I'm distorting it with the bit 8 here. And then I'm using the vocoder, and I've got this 4-stage here, and I've got it set to change the bands. I've got it set to change the band width. I've got it set to change the internal filters here of where the bands are starting and stopping in the frequency spectrum. I've got it changing the Formant. I've even got it changing the attack and release. And so when you add all that in, it's like a mental filter where you have like a load of different bands that you can control. So if I just leave that on and then turn it off, so yeah, if you want more control over the bands, you can also put it in a like a multi-band effects, and then you have control over the bandwidth and stuff of individual frequencies. I've got an example here as well of on this bass of me doing just that. So I have got the same sound here. I'll turn off the multi-band effects. It's the same sound, and then if I turn this on, so we're using it to get kind of a squelchy, kind of vocoder-y sort of sound. So the way that I'm doing that is I've just got one here in the mid, and I've got one here in the high band, and I've got completely different settings on them. I can change them independently. So yeah, there's a way that you can control it kind of per frequency band, I suppose, and you can get good results, really like kind of weird wet kind of sounds. So the other thing that you can do with it is you can use drums as your modulator here. So I've just got this drum loop, and then I'm bringing in those chords from before. So I'm bringing in that instrument layer that I had at the start here with the Pigments, and I'm just bringing that in with the And then of course the attack and release is going to have a big effect on how it sounds. And of course you can change the bands and stuff like that as well to alter the sound. The next thing I wanted to show you here was just an example of using it on effects. So instead of just using it as an actual effect in itself, you can use it to alter other effects. So I've got it on a delay here on some drums. But one of my favorite ones to use on is the reverb. So on the reverb here, I have a vocoder. So it pretty drastically alters the sound of the reverb if you put it on the wet effect. So there's the reverb itself. So that's pretty cool in itself. The other thing you can do is an example of what I did earlier. So I've got a reverb here and I've got a modulator. So let me just turn this up. So, and I'll turn up the reverb the Reverb Mixer. So what I've got coming through here is I've got a modulator, which is currently set to nothing. So let's take it from the vocal and let's freeze. Bring up the volume there a bit. So you can see every time we freeze, we're getting like a vastly different quality to the reverb. And we can still mess with the Formant and stuff. And of course you can pull it in from, say you wanted to pull it in from the chords that we were using. So let's pick up the instrument layer here and I'll bring in the chords. Maybe even we want to bring it in from the other drums that we had. So let's select those here. Let's go back to the vocal there. So let's take the vocal. So yeah, you can do that with pretty much anything. So you can take, you know, a vocal or drums or even a synth or a bass sound or something that you have, and you can bring it in through the modulator and use it to affect your reverb or something like that. It's cool for any kind of like big reverby drums or something that you're doing to get a cool effect on it. So that's about the height of it. I think that's pretty much everything for the vocoder. So yeah, I hope that was useful to you in some way, shape or form. Thanks a million. And yeah, that's it.